The Druid is a very interesting class because in my mind it represents a paradox. See, the idea, the fantasy of a Druid is to be the almighty master of nature, controllable of the earth itself, and yet at the same time, to control nature and bend it to its will is to no longer allow it to be nature. Nature is what happens when life is allowed to do its own thing, allowed to flourish without the tyranny of control.
I'm simply saying that life finds a way.
And so when people think about this, they may look at the Druid and assume that there is some portion of it that is inherently just wrong, that it doesn't make sense within a world, but I very much disagree. I think that because of this fact, the Druid is one of the most fascinating types of classes because there is so much you can then learn from it. There's so much story you can then experience, so long as you choose to dive in further and truly see exactly what the Druid is. So let's talk about it.
On all levels except physical, I am a wolf.
When looking at the Druid, we get to see a few different things. And let's dive into the mechanics first of all, because I think by diving into the mechanics, we can then see some of the flavor and experience that comes out of the Druid class that maybe the designers might have been intending. Let's look at the first two abilities that you get, Spellcasting and Wild Shape. Now we'll get to Wild Shape in a second because I do think that it might be a little bit antithesis to what I'm talking about prior. The spellcasting portion of the Druid is honestly one of their largest features, and yet funnily enough, I feel it is probably one of their most underrated. Because you see, there's nothing that really makes a Druid stand out spellcasting wise. They're prepared casters, much like any other class, and they have the ability to swap out their spells on a long rest. Cool, there's nothing really unique about that. But instead, what really makes the Druid unique is, despite the lack of unique spellcasting mechanics, is their spell list. One of the most varied there is. It has an incredible array of different abilities, but they pretty much all focus on one thing, nature. Now, why do they focus on nature? Obviously because that's what the Druid is, but because of this, it leads to something very interesting. When you take a look at the Druid's spell list itself, it all focuses on the elements, which then leads to it having a ton of different things. It has combat abilities such as Flame Strike or Call Lightning because, well, you know, that's very nature focused, isn't it? Then you also have healing spells as well as a bunch of utility. This means that Druids, despite the fact that they don't have anything specific in spellcasting that you might think make them stand out, they still have a ton there that makes them feel very special and impactful. But even despite all that, spellcasting is not really what most people think of when they hear Druid. No, instead, they think of the second thing you get, Wild Shape.
What the dog doing?
And Wild Shape is very interesting. Wild Shape allows a Druid to turn into a beast. And it depends on what type of CR they are in 5th edition.
Can I turn into Kirby?
No, you can't. What? Kirby is not a beast. Kirby is a god of destruction.
Can I turn into Kirby?
Kirby is a god of destruction. He's not a beast. What are you talking about? Anyways.
No, ears.
He doesn't have ears. That is untrue.
No, but like on your shirt he does.
No, he doesn't. Those are his hands.
What about the character right beside it?
The Waddle Dee?
Can I turn into a Waddle Dee?
No. Wild Shape allows Druids to turn into beasts of a certain CR, depending on your Druid's circle. Now, that is pretty much all it does. It just lets you turn into these beasts, and objectively, in 5th edition specifically, it's not that impactful. However, this is what most people think of when they think of Druids, because the ability to turn into beasts almost on command, I realize there's a charge system for it, but let's consider that it's on command, like they show in the D&D movie. That is what most people focus on. The ability for Druids to turn into nature. And so, when we go back to the beginning of the video where I talk about the paradoxical nature of Druids, it does seem interesting, doesn't it? Because I said that they control nature, and yet one of their most core and constantly recognized abilities is the ability to turn into nature. So which is it? Well, most of the abilities that the Druids get outside of just those two I mentioned are not very important. Druids don't get a lot of abilities in the main class. Instead, they get it within their subclass, known as circles. And that truly is where the point that I'm trying to make lies. Let's take a look at some of the circles. You have druidic traditions such as the Circle of Spores, which allows you to control, well, spores and mushrooms. Or the Circle of Land, which allows you to control the earth and the land itself. Or you have the Circle of Moons, or Dreams, or yeah, Circle of Dreams. It's kind of, yeah. it's basically just a Feywild thing. You control the nature of the Feywilds, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but the point is, most of the circles just allow you to control whatever it is that you want, which is interesting. They focus on controlling that specific element of nature which you have become most attuned with. I want to focus on a specific circle which I think makes this paradoxical nature of the Druid the most evident, and that would be the circle of wildfire. Now, fire is a portion of nature. It's a very important portion of nature, because not only does it coal the earth and make sure that certain types of nature do not grow too far outside their bounds, it is also something that brings life. When a wildfire tears through a certain area, it then allows the chance for life to bloom in its most natural of states. And that is basically entirely what this entire circle is about. Now, I do understand that there are a lot of very serious wildfires happening in the world as of now, and most of those are man-made in some way or another. That's not what I'm discussing here. Those are disruptive to nature, and I fully recognize that. But when nature is fully allowed to thrive, a wildfire is something that oftentimes keeps it in check. But then you bring along this druid whose main ability is to summon a wildfire spirit and then control it. And this brings into focus the main point I'm trying to make, that druids are paradoxical in nature because they control what is supposed to be natural and uncontrolled. Hi everybody, Editor J here. My wife is holding the camera for some reason instead of just putting it on the tripod. I wanted to mention something else about the Wildfire Druid because I think it's honestly really fascinating and highlights this point the best. See, the Wildfire Druid has a very interesting spell list. It has a spell list that focuses specifically on fire, but also healing. Where they might have something like Flame Strike, they also have things like Mass Cure Wounds. And yet, that's incredibly interesting because why do they have these two different ideas? Well, because fire is balanced in the idea of nature. While fire will go across the entire earth and scorch things, it then also brings life. While it coals what is there, it then creates an environment where new life can flourish. And this does perfectly describe everything about the druid that I'm talking about. This idea of the difference of nature and can you control nature while also acknowledging that it has a balance. And the Wildfire Druid is perfect to encompass this, and I honestly think the spell list that they created is one of the most flavorful and incredible because it really shows the dichotomy of nature. And if you are to control nature, you must understand the balance of it. And do you let that take its natural course, or do you try to control it, therefore corrupting its very concept? And this brings in this very interesting and very fun, unique dynamic where you have to, as a druid, come to terms with this. Because the truth is, I don't think that this is a design flaw. I think it's amazing because what it does is it allows you to explore the idea of a druid in the most incredible way by diving into what it means to be a druid. Are you somebody who understands nature, understands that nature must be natural, and therefore you have to come to terms with the fact that bad and good things must happen. As a wildfire must tear through the world, so too must new things be allowed to grow. Or are you a druid who rejects this idea, who thinks that nature should be controlled? It is too chaotic, it is too harmful, and therefore you go against the very thing that you are meant to be a part of. This is why I think druids are interesting, because they can embody world building in the most literal of senses. They have the ability to grow a story in ways a lot of other classes don't have the opportunity to. A lot of the times we talk about warlocks being the absolute culmination of a role-playing class. They have role-play hooks baked right into them, right? Don't druids in a far more intense sense? If you actually take druids to their furthest extreme, there's so much to learn about them. And this also leads to a very fun idea where you would take a druid and make a very compelling villain out of them. Because a druid who is struggling with this so much to not understand, who then tries to subjugate nature and therefore throws the entire balance of the world into chaos, is a fascinating villain because you can understand where they're coming from, but also see the very detrimental things they're doing to the world itself. There's so much about this class to explore based off of how does your druid view nature? That is a fascinating topic to explore and learn about and grow from, and I think that if you take the classes within this game of Dungeons & Dragons and delve into them to the furthest extent, you can always find some of the most fascinating story hooks and things to learn from and grow from and create an amazing story. People oftentimes ask me, how do you make a complex character? And this is how. By taking them to their furthest extremes and realistically treating it as anybody would. How do they feel about it? What do they think? and how are they going to learn? So go out and play an incredible druid, you beautiful bastards. Don't forget to go out into the world, make it your own, and never forget to play your role. That might be the first time in a long time I've actually gotten my intro right without like messing it up immediately.
If only it was an intro.
Outro. Fuck! God damn it.